And it's now my pleasure to give the floor to ACA's President Ulrich Grothus for his final reflections on the topics addressed by our event and some closing remarks. Ulrich is joining us online.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for introducing me. This is a flagship event of ACA's activities and has been for many years. And I'm glad that, again, it attracted more than 100 participants from across Europe. I'm very much aware that I'm standing between you and a very late lunch, so we'll try to be brief. We have again heard a wide range of information from policy and even strategic issues to the very practical questions of program implementation. And I know that most of you have been attracted to this event mainly for the latter and only in part to the former. The heading, fortunately, at this point is closing reflections and not summary, so you will allow me to be somewhat personal and subjective and just stressing some points that I would take away, and everybody will take away, of course, their own points. And I will start with the more practical issues. First keyword is inclusion. Juan Rayon today mentioned how important money is, as important as attitudinal obstacles may be, but how important money is for people to actually be mobile. And that we should also be flexible and in supporting people who need more with more money. And I think the good message is that we learned yesterday that this is already possible. Another takeaway is the enormous echo and interest in blended intensive programs that we saw yesterday. This is, of course, due to the pandemic, but I think it will be an important feature of our cooperation and mobility in the months and years to come. As to the European Universities initiatives, Anne-May Janssen stressed that we are in a pilot phase. And I think that is very important. This is an experimental program. We need to try many ways, some of which may prove to be dead ends, and others will prove to be models. And I think it's very important that we do not settle on prematurely on one model, but try many and see which work best. I think a more critical takeaway I remember were the remarks on the IT support of program implementation, and I understand that many people in national agencies and universities are not too happy about that, to put it diplomatically, and I think something needs to be done on that. A final practical takeaway is the lump sum model in Key Action 2. So I've been working for many years in a funding agency myself, and I know how difficult it is for funding agencies to accept that universities themselves know best how to implement a program and a project in concrete ways. And I think it's great news that we now have a lump sum model in these programs as well, even if that, of course, also entails a bit of a risk for institutions to do that. Let me come to the other more strategic and policy-oriented part of this event. So we were talking, particularly at the beginning, a lot about the European strategy for universities. And I think back a year, we were already in that process. We were then talking about a transformation agenda. I think the current European strategy for universities is more focused in scope, perhaps a bit less ambitious, but on the other hand, more concrete and more focused on things that the European Union can do something about, and the Commission can do something about. So it may be more an EU strategy for universities than a European strategy for universities, but that's a good thing. And I think one of the good things, or the main good thing, is that it stresses how important transnational cooperation is for meaningful change in institutions. So in order to achieve our, so to speak, domestic objectives in institutions, we need transnational cooperation, and transnational cooperation will serve that purpose in teaching and research and service as well. And I think that's a very important point to remember. We have seen that this strategy entails 4 pillars and 4 flagship actions. One has to admit that some of the flagships are much bigger than others. If you take on one hand the European Universities Initiative with 1.1 billion euro to be spent over the program period, and on the other hand the European Student Card, much more limited in scope. And if you also think of which was just mentioned in passing, that in the Next Generation Europe initiative, 80 billion euros will be spent in higher education. So that's a very huge flagship and a very huge impact on what actually happens in the field. Such a focused European strategy and EU strategy and Commission strategy is, of course, not fully responding to the big challenges that individual institutions and member states will have to face in higher education in the years to come. Let me just mention 3. One is the very idea of what higher education means, the educational model. How will we respond to the fact that skills are outdated in ever shorter terms? How will we prepare people to benefit from their education for a lifetime, not only in their professions, but also as private citizens? Will there be a revival of the idea of liberal arts education as we see it already in a number of institutions? So I think that is a question and a challenge that institutions will need to reply to. Institutions will also need to think of their very role as individual institutions, with the virtual education taking a bigger part also in higher education, and probably platform corporations becoming more active in the field. So I think the very role of the individual institution and the individual campus will be a big challenge for strategic reflection in institutions. And finally, and there also the Commission communication gives some answers, but probably not all that we need, is how do we react to the shift in the global landscape of higher education and research, where the dominance of Europe and North America that has characterized most of the 20th century is vanishing, where other actors are becoming more important, like them or not, share their values or not. So we will need to cope with this changing landscape, where Europe still needs to play an important role, but will no longer play the only central role as it did in the 19th and in the beginning of the 20th century. Let me conclude by stressing some points where we see room for development and perhaps also need for development in the implementation of this European strategy. First point is I think we should not focus too much on the European Universities Initiative. I'm personally, and ACA is very much in favor of this initiative. It's a great opportunity, but still we need to keep in mind that most universities will not enter one of those alliances and probably should not do so. And we need to ensure that transnational cooperation beyond the European Universals initiatives is meaningful, is supported, is encouraged. We need probably a stronger and more detailed emphasis on the global outreach and cooperation of European higher education institutions, not only stressing our competitive position, but also the great opportunities for learning on both sides that global cooperation, particularly with countries in the global south, entails. And let me finally stress that we should not duplicate existing monitoring and evaluation activities, but make better use of those that already exist and the data that already exists. So I leave it at that. Also, my time's up, and so is yours probably. So I think this is a great orientation and a great basis for our future joint work on the European, on the national, and on the institutional level. Let me conclude by thanking all of the speakers, particularly those from the Commission, who shared fresh information with us, answered your questions, or most of them at any rate. So great that all those speakers took their time to be with us and share their knowledge and wisdom with us. Let me also thank all the participants who were with us for these 2 days, and in particular those who put questions and ask questions and make our presentations and discussions even more responsive to what actually you in institutions and agencies need. And let me finally thank the organizers in the ACA Secretariat who prepared this seminar and who made sure that it worked smoothly. You did a perfect job. Thank you so much also on behalf of all the participants. And so see you hopefully in person next year again, and have a good weekend. Thanks to all of you.